Good afternoon. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the stakeholder call to discuss the 2019 Policy Initiatives Roadmap as part of the annual Policy Initiatives Roadmap process. My name is Jimmy Pizarro with the ISO Stakeholder Affairs Group, and I'm also joined by my colleagues here in the room today, starting to my left.
Keith Johnson.
Brittany Dean.
Greg Cook. Tom Trethaway. Brad Cooper. John Gooden.
Thanks, folks. As with all of our initiatives and recurring processes, the presentation and all related material for this webinar can be found on the Stakeholder Processes webpage, located on the drop-down menu under the Stay Informed tab on our website, and then you would notice the specific initiative under the Recurring Processes section. In addition, the calls and webinars are recorded for stakeholder convenience, allowing those who are unable to attend to listen to the recordings after the meetings. The recordings will be publicly available on the ISO webpage for a limited time following the meetings. Of course, the recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And if you have any questions on the phone, please raise your hand by pressing pound 2, not star 2. And for everyone, of course, please state the name and the company that you represent. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Brittany.
Good late afternoon, everyone. First, we'll start off with the stakeholder comments received from the draft 3-year roadmap and annual plan. Our first high-level these are just kind of an overview of our high-level comments. Stakeholders generally supported our 3-year roadmap and annual plan. PG&E did believe that our annual plan would be too ambitious. The ISO believes that our annual plan is appropriate given our environmental policies the state is undergoing right now. As well as a reminder, any changes to the annual plan through the remaining of the year will be given through our MPPF forum, so stakeholders can find out if we're on track for our annual plan through that forum. The public interest organization group believe that the ISO should plan and execute an EIM benefit study and revisit the governance. The ISO wants to remind everyone that our EIM entities are performing a feasibility test in which we are participating in. After its completion, the ISO would then evaluate whether governance changes will be needed based on that study. The other stakeholder comments we received from NV Energy, PowerX, and Seattle City Light were that they believe that the ISO should create a separate initiative that will address the real-time resource efficiency test. The ISO has made several attempts to discuss this topic through various forums, and we are implementing changes to our resource efficiency test this year. And as a reminder, a holistic review of that resource efficiency test will be reviewed and evaluated in our extension of Dayahead market to EIM entities. The other main topic of stakeholder comments we received was from eMotorworks, CEDMC, OhmConnect, and PG&E, reiterating their support for ESDR 4 as well as advocating for expanded scope items. Do want to remind everyone that ESDR 4 has not yet been scoped, and scope items will be solicited during the stakeholder process when that initiative begins. Moving on to our final roadmap, the primary drivers that really drove our 3-year roadmap are we are continuously experiencing operational challenges which are pointing to our Dayahead market that need to be enhanced as well to manage net load in real time. We are continuing to make improvements to EIM to meet the needs of that expanding market. The extended Dayahead market enhancements to EIM balancing areas provides regional benefits, and so we are proposing different initiatives to accomplish that driver. We are with the increasing risk of retirements, which are leading to an increase in our reliability must-run contracts, is driving the need for a resource adequacy change or reform to the programs that are established, as well as lowering their barriers to our distributed energy resources and storage market participation.
So good afternoon, everybody. This is Don Trethaway. So in terms of the extending the Dayahead markets to the EIM entities initiative, this will provide some key benefits that we believe. But again, this will all be validated as part of the feasibility assessment, whether we move forward with this. But the intent of the initiative is to allow EIM participants to benefit from the Dayahead market in addition to the real-time market. This would allow us to have a Dayahead unit commitment and scheduling across an even larger footprint, which should improve market efficiency and more effectively integrate renewables. The key principles of the extended day-ahead market are the same as the energy imbalance market. So each balancing authority area would retain its reliability responsibilities. In addition, states continue to maintain control over their integrated resource planning, which means that there's not a resource adequacy program being extended as a result of this. That still remains with the local regulatory authority, as well as any transmission planning for both the generation investment decisions. Those, again, still remain with each of the balancing authority areas and the local regulatory authority. Next slide, please. So as we look at extending the day-ahead market, there are areas of the design that we know we need to look at through a robust stakeholder process. The first is with regards to transmission provision for the day-ahead market. How do you maintain the existing transmission cost recovery structures that exist today bilaterally? The next is we do need to implement some sort of resource efficiency evaluation in the day-ahead timeframe. Just like in the real time, the resource efficiency tests ensure that balancing authority areas that are in the EIM don't inappropriately lean on other balancing authority areas, flexibility, capacity, or transmission. We're also looking, as part of this, the day-ahead resource efficiency, real-time day-ahead resource efficiency, to provide some additional functionality where you can make short-term trades of flexibility or capacity, so that one balancing authority area that's long, for instance, on upward capability, could sell it to another balancing authority area that's short, so that the short balancing authority area would now be able to pass the resource efficiency test. The next is a mechanism to distribute congested revenues. So in the day-ahead time frame, this is a payment that load receives. And so in the ISO market, we use congestion revenue rights to distribute these congestion revenues. There may be other approaches that you could take as well to doing that within the EIM balancing authority areas. The next is around the full network model enhancements. So currently the way we model intertie transactions in the EIM for EIM entities is based upon the source and sink balancing authority area of those intertie transactions. And in the ISO, we model them basically the boundary of our footprint. In the day-ahead time frame, we would want to consolidate this approach to the one that we currently use for the EIM entities. Next, we will need to look at the GHG attribution approach to see if we can extend what we have currently are using in the real-time market, if that can scale to the day-ahead market, or if we need to look at potential other options so that we can appropriately reflect the carbon policies of the various states that are participating in the EDAM. And then lastly, yes, there will be governance changes if this mission goes ahead. At a minimum, we're looking at expanding the scope of what is under the purview of the EIM or EDAM governing body. Currently they have responsibilities over the real-time market. You'd be looking at extending it to day-ahead market elements, design elements as well.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Talking about some of the market enhancements that will take place in the roadmap on my team, the Infrastructure and Regulatory Policy Group. Obviously, a big one is the resource adequacy enhancements. This slide is again from our earlier presentation on the roadmap, outlining some of the trends that we're seeing that are altering the resource adequacy landscape in California. Again, one of the biggies is obviously the grid is transforming, and resource adequacy based on the summer peak demand really isn't securing the right resources as we add more solar and renewable resources to the grid, and more concerned about net load and the shifting late peak. So we need a resource adequacy program that can accommodate that late shift and the new resource types. Load migration, obviously, as we see the proliferation of CCAs and new load serving entities and some of the contracting practices So that's causing some load migration, which is, again, changing some of the procurement landscape and how folks are motivated to procure or not to procure resources long term. Obviously, the third bullet here, we have growing distributed energy resources being added to the grid. And so, again, changing the shape of the load, the net load. We also have gas resources that are needed for the system to provide some of that flexibility, but some of these resources are coming off PPAs and are in need of some maintenance and capital investment to keep them adequate and going. So that's obviously impacting some of our resource adequacy needs, is how we maintain some of this flexibility as the grid transforms. And finally, as we grow more and more dependent and as we're installing more renewable and zero marginal cost resources, that's leading to lower energy prices, which obviously is impacting revenue adequacy and causing some potential uneconomic retirement. So again, these were some of the trends that, you know, we teed up earlier that are still very relevant, that are sort of causing some of the pressure that we see on the resource adequacy program. Next slide. So with that, again, we are looking to collaborate to realign the resource adequacy program to meet these transforming needs. The PUC, as you all know, had actually 3 tracks. The most relevant and germane were Track 2 for the 2020 RA program. Obviously, those that are following this know that there was a proposed decision just released last week. So we have better clarity on kind of what's the direction that we're taking in Track 2 from the PUC. What you have here on this slide is what the ISO is petitioning for in that Track 2 and what we would like to have seen in that decision. And then Track 3 was some of the items that once we got the multi-year resource adequacy from Track 2, what are some of the further refinements that we'd like to see in Track 3 for the 2021 RA program. And one of the biggies for the ISO, as some are aware, is really how are we going to transform and reconsider some of the accounting of resources and application of things like effective load carrying capability, things like those types of accounting conventions for resources. Next slide. So with that background, both on emerging trends and kind of what the ISO is looking for in these latest 2 tracks of the RA proceeding, again, informed by the latest PD of the PUC, the resource adequacy enhancements that we are looking to promote really fall into 2 phases. One that we'd implement in 2019, so the first phase, and then an implementation second phase in 2020. And so what you see here is the list of items that we had prioritized for each of these phases. Now, as folks are, again, that are following this are probably aware that on October 22nd, the ISO published its issue paper on resource adequacy enhancements and how it wanted to sort of divide and conquer this initiative and make these resource adequacy enhancements. We actually received comments back from many stakeholders on the 14th, and our next milestone is our straw proposal for what we've called Part 1 issues. Again, there's a lot of meaty issues here, so we've got to kind of divvy it up and tackle it in smaller bites. So we have this Part 1, and the straw proposal on that we're planning to publish on December 20th. And so again, on this slide, you'll see kind of how we were thinking about how to do these RA enhancements in the 2 phases. Again, since the roadmap and as we move forward and evolve, the issue paper actually teed up some specific things that we're going to work on. Obviously, RA counting and eligibility rules, There's a couple of different provisions that are addressing some of the RE import capability provisions and import rules. We're going to look at the resource availability incentive mechanisms and what kind of incentives those are putting into the market and how we might want to change those and some of the must-offer obligation rules. And then finally, resource availability. This concern that the ISO is teed up and will tee up here in this initiative is resources that have a certain availability limitations, can only run for a certain number of hours, a day, or consecutive days or months, and how we count and qualify those resources for resource adequacy. So that's sort of a summary in a nutshell of kind of what we're actually teeing up in our issue paper under this initiative that we have now launched. Next slide. Okay, shifting gears, let's move to the Energy Storage and Distributed Energy Resources Initiative. Again, another key item on our roadmap that's in the Infrastructure and Regulatory Policy group. The goal here is to really refine DER and storage participation models and lower those integration barriers to participation from those types of resources. As there is, again, we're moving on to our fourth phase. I see this as kind of ongoing as we continue to refine these participation models for these preferred resources like DER and storage. And as we look at the scope of items that folks want to tackle and then sort of winnowing that down in each phase to what we can accomplish that year and then deferring what we can to the following year and then reprioritizing. So just so folks understand, that's sort of how this ESDR initiative is rolling, if you will, is in sort of these ongoing phases to address sort of highest priority items year after year in the participation DER and storage. Another part of this is FERC Order 841 compliance. That's something that we just about have our compliance filing completed, and you should be seeing that here soon. We should be filing that here shortly. So that's definitely in progress. Finally, regulatory frameworks to address DER storage, resource adequacy qualification rules, and some of the accounting rules for DERs, particularly like weather-sensitive DR. These are some of the issues that we want to tackle as well. And ESDR is, you know, how do we assess the right qualifying capacity values and net qualifying capacity values to these types of resources, like our distributed energy resource provider model. We need to resolve how resource adequacy counts to an aggregation of DER resources. That's work to be done. So there's plenty of priority items here. And finally, this last bullet is an ongoing work and effort that we want to, again, take up in ESDR is to continue some of the good work that the PUC has done on the multi-use applications and carry that on to clearly define multi-use applications, like I say here, to ensure the sensible service and value stacking that supports reliability and optimizes resource value. So that's an ongoing effort that we want to take up in ESDR 4 as well, as to continue to refine multi-use application rules. So hopefully that gives you a flavor for a couple of the key initiatives on the roadmap related to resource adequacy and our energy storage and distributed energy resource initiatives. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Greg, who will give us the walkthrough of sort of the big picture of the roadmap.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So this is our 3-year roadmap. Again, the 3-year roadmap is to depict the major initiatives that we have planned over the next 3 years. Also on this chart, we show the policy development, which is shown by the boxes, the orange and blue boxes, and then the actual proposed implementation timeline is depicted by the blue diamonds. And so we generally have one new policy release or new functionality each year, And so as you can see, we've added 2018 to the roadmap, so we have pretty heavy implementation load scheduled out all the way through 2021. So what we're trying to do through the 3-year roadmap is, balance our implementation load as well as the policy development, and also looking at it over a 3-year timeline, make sure that we can have a well-thought-out evolution of the market design as we go forward. So when we look at the roadmap for this year, and again, this is kind of an evergreen process. We update this every year based on new information that we get. What we're finding is that, for 2019, our primary focus is going to be on Dayahead market improvements. This includes the Dayahead Market Enhancements initiative that is underway. That initiative has been split into 2 separate parts, first being 15-minute scheduling. Policy development is largely complete on that, and now we're turning our focus to designing the Dayahead flexible ramping product piece of that proposal. And we intend to complete that by mid-next year, and that would then set the stage for looking at starting an initiative to extend the Dayahead market to EIM entities, provided that the EIM entities' feasibility assessments come out and state that they do find that there would be benefits to participating in the ISO's Dayahead market. Moving on down the list, we also have underway the local market power mitigation enhancement. Again, this is largely an EIM-driven initiative where we identified some issues with how the market power mitigation was being applied, and in particular to EIM hydro resources. That initiative is well underway, looking to be completed next year. And then, moving into the resource adequacy area, these are the items John just discussed. We have a whole list of resource adequacy enhancements that we'll be pursuing next year, as well as finalizing the enhancements to our backstop capacity procurement measures of the capacity procurement mechanism and the reliability must-run provisions. So those are underway and scheduled to be completed next year as well. And then finally, John also talked about the ESDR 4 initiative, and again, this is an ongoing initiative where we start the initiative by identifying potential enhancements for storage and distributed energy resources, and then we go through and do our own, mini roadmap process within that initiative to prioritize the initiatives that we're going to take on for the upcoming years. So we intend to have that continue on as we move forward. Moving into 2020, then we would focus back into some of the real-time market enhancements we've been looking at, more EIM refinements, as well as looking at enhancing some of the products that we have for frequency response and regulation, making sure that those products are enhanced in a way that recognizes the value that fast and accurate responding resources are providing to the grid. So those, have been on a roadmap for a while. We tend to refocus our efforts on those in 2020. And then moving into 2021, I think 2021, we're viewing it as a bit of a freeze period, and where we really want to see how all of the enhancements that we've been designing and implementing over the previous 2 years are working, whether there's additional refinements we've identified that need to take place in 2021. And then as well, during 2021, we think at that point we may need to be putting an even larger focus on enhancements for distributed energy resources, as we expect development of those resources to continue to increase as we move forward. So we would expect to be putting more efforts in that area, particularly as we move forward into the 2021 time frame. So that's kind of a high-level look of our 3-year roadmap. Again, this is the primary driver of what we end up with our annual plan for the upcoming year. But I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions on the 3-year roadmap before I go into the annual plan.
Thanks, Greg. No questions in the queue, but folks, please press pound 2 if you'd like to ask a question.
We do have questions in the queue.
Go ahead with first caller, please.
Good evening. This is Connie Dorland with the Public Advocate's Office. I was calling regarding the deliverability assessment methodology that was introduced at the 2018-2019 TP meeting last Friday. I just wanted to find out if the CAISO can consider a separate initiative to further discuss how this deliverability methodology would be implemented.
Yeah, so changes to the transmission planning process, those are addressed through separate initiatives. Every year we run through that transmission planning process. That is not included in our roadmap, as that is a separate process in and of itself. But we don't have anybody here from the transmission planning department, but that's essentially where those types of issues are addressed.
Okay.
Next question.
We still got 2 questions in the queue.
Okay.
Hi, this is Chen Yu from PG&E. Quick question. So on page 10, when you talk about RA enhancement phase 1, look like there is the implementation for Fort. I do not see that on page 12 under enhanced resource adequacy, other than CPM and RMR implementation. So is that means the RA enhancement phase 1 going to be added to 2019?
Yeah, and I think what we've identified is, correct me if I'm wrong here, John, that we really didn't have any new functionality that's needed for those track 1 RA enhancements, and so we were able to combine all of the RA enhancements into a single initiative, which, again, we're planning that. Those changes that would take new functionality to be implemented would go in place in the fall of 2020 for the 2021 RA year.
I think just to follow up on what Greg said is that, as we're beginning to scope, we just came out with the issue paper, and as we're beginning to scope the RA initiatives, RA enhancements initiative, it's sort of, like I said, sort of divide and conquer, because there's a lot of fairly meaty issues. I think that's a determination that we need to make, whether there will be some actual IT-type system enhancements needed in fall of 2019 to implement some of the policies. So on this graphic, there's not a particular diamond there, but again, this is early in the process, and so we'll see if some implementation efforts are needed. So more to come.
Thank you.
We do have one more question in the line.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Stephanie Johnson at Seattle City Light. I just have one kind of, we looked at the draft roadmap versus the final roadmap and didn't see any changes, and I wanted to confirm that we weren't missing something, that there weren't any changes.
Yeah, that's correct. We did consider the stakeholder comments that we received as Brittany ran through as we started the presentation today, and we believe that the draft roadmap that we proposed, even considering the comments that we received, we didn't warrant any changes from where we were at.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
At this time, there are no further questions.
Okay, thanks. So with that,
I will talk about well, and before we move on to the roadmap, I know there was a stakeholder comment as for the definition of what we are terming EIM refinements. That was just a general term that we used on the roadmap as far as the scope in which EIM refinements would be. That would be determined as we get closer to 2020, and that would go the same for any market refinements or DER enhancements. So with that, I'll move on to the two initial new initiatives that we have for the annual plan. Those first two are, the first one being the multi-GHG area. As these other states are considering carbon reduction policies, we will need to be able to incorporate their policies into the energy imbalance market. We did receive a stakeholder comment asking why this wouldn't be listed as a potential initiative instead of permanent. At this time, the ISO believes that by the time we will take on this initiative, there will be policy enough for us to begin our stakeholder process to incorporate state's policy into the energy imbalance market. The second initiative that is added to the annual plan is our market settlement timeline enhancements. Our current settlement timelines need to be updated with our market processes, and so that initiative will look at aligning those. We also have two more potential initiatives that may make it to our roadmap. This first one being system market power mitigation. This issue was brought and raised through DMM in their 2017 annual report. The ISO is performing an analysis of our market competitiveness within our balancing area. We then plan to share that analysis with our stakeholders, and depending on the analysis, we may commence an initiative to address any initiatives or any identified issues. These initiatives are shown in a light gray as a potential initiative, which Greg will further explain on the next slide. The second initiative is the congestion revenue rights auction efficiency, track 2. Right now, the CAISO will analyze the effectiveness of our track 1A and 1B measures that were approved this year. After that, we will share our analysis with stakeholders and commence an initiative to address any remaining issues that arise through our analysis. And with that, I will hand it to Greg for our annual plan.
Okay, so this shows our proposed draft final annual plan for 2019. We have 14 planned initiatives to take on in 2019. 14 of those initiatives are initiatives that will be continuing on that were started this year. Then we have the 5 new initiatives, which Brittany discussed as well. So what's shown on this chart, the major initiatives are depicted by orange, and the really major initiatives are depicted by darker orange, and then we have the other initiatives which are shown in blue. And then as Brittany said, we also have 2 initiatives that we put in gray. The reason those are in gray, again, is that we haven't concluded at this point that we will actually be running those initiatives, because those will be based on analysis that we will be conducting in the earlier part of the year, and those are for system market power mitigation. We're currently doing an assessment on that, as well as on the CRR auction efficiency track 2. As most of you are aware, we did a number of changes to our CRR to address CRR auction efficiency that were recently implemented. We want to see the effectiveness of those changes during the first half of the year, and depending on the effectiveness of those changes, we'll make a determination whether further changes to our CRR market are warranted. So with that, quickly running down the list, since there's a lot of acronyms in here, they got the Dayahead market 15-minute scheduling initiative, which again, policy is largely completed on that. We have said we may need to go back and make some minor changes to the policy in the event that we run into unresolvable system performance issues that we have to address. Next, we have the storage as a transmission asset initiative. This is a response to FERC's policy statement to allow storage resources to be procured as transmission assets, but also then have the ability to offset some of their costs by participating in the market. We have our intertie deviation settlement initiative. This one's ongoing. This is again to improve the incentives to ensure that interties that are scheduled through our markets actually tag and show up in real time. The local market power mitigation enhancements, again, I briefly commented on this. This is to address some of the mitigation issues we're having primarily with EIM hydro resources. We have the excess behind-the-meter production initiative. This was, we have issues raised where now we have we have load-serving entities that are treating this excess behind-the-meter production differently, so we're trying to set policy on this, and this is for, rooftop solar type resources that at times are producing more and putting energy out back onto the grid. How are we going to settle that, and how are we going to measure the load for cost allocation purposes as well? So that initiative is clarifying the rules for that issue. We have the ISO's Backstop Procurement Authority initiative, the CPM and RMR. That one's currently underway, again, being targeted for completion in Q1 of next year. The system market power mitigation, I talked about that. We're currently conducting analysis. And then we have the large initiative of the Dayahead flexible ramping product. We also include in here deliverable capacity products because we will be looking at making sure that all of our ancillary services are deliverable and that we're not procuring resources that can't be utilized due to congestion. And then finally, once we complete that, we tend to launch into extending the Dayahead market to EIM entities. Again, that is contingent on the outcome of the EIM entities' feasibility assessments. We have the ESDR 4 initiative, which John talked about. That's currently we're working on scoping that initiative out. We have the new initiative on market settlement timeline transformation, which Brittany talked about. The RA Enhancements initiative, again, this is another large initiative. John mentioned there's a number of pieces to that. And then finally, we have in the latter part of the year, we'll be looking at an initiative on multi-greenhouse gas areas, and that, again, would be driven if there's a need, if other states in the West are adopting carbon policies that would need to be addressed through our markets. And then finally, the one we already talked about, the CR auction efficiency track 2 is something we committed to, but again, that's going to be based on our analysis over the first half of the year as to whether or not additional changes are warranted. So that is our annual plan for 2019. And stop there and see if there are any final questions.
Look at a few in the queue. Thanks, Greg.
Hi, this is Chun-Yu Lo from PG&E. Could you elaborate the market settlement timeline transformation? Is that something that you think, okay, with all the initiatives going on, there is a need to relook at the settlement timelines, or you guys already have something in mind that going to change the settlement timeline dramatically? Because I see the term transformation.
Yeah, I think, this is an initiative that is, I guess I would characterize a long time coming. We've made a lot of changes to our markets over the years. We've added new products, new processes, and it's really, I think, somewhat overdue that we need to, it's becoming somewhat, our current timeline's becoming somewhat unworkable. We're having, significant resettlement that's going on months and months and months into the future. And so this will be an initiative to look at, how we can assess those timelines so that they're better aligned with our current market processes and make it a, more efficient process. So it's really being driven by changes that have already occurred, but also in mind.
And I would add that it's also logical to be working on that now because as part of the Dayahead market enhancements, the first phase, 15-minute scheduling, that has a very significant settlement impact in terms of shadow settlement systems for stakeholders as well. So it'd be good to get these paralleled and both put in place in the same time frame in 2019.
And those are some of the things we look at as we put the roadmap together.
So we're looking for gaining efficiency, we're gaining performance as well, and and perhaps some timeline changes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, Greg. Dan Williams from CES. Just a quick question with the FERC order that came out on the Aliso Canyon Phase 4 measures. The CAISO talked a bit in there just about the potential to need to make some permanent changes after the temporary tariff measures would run out at the end of 2019. Would we expect to see some new initiatives in 2019 on that, or do you expect to cover all of those in CCW? Would it be BPM change process?
Yeah, those are largely covered in CCW. You know, there's a couple of small exceptions to that, and we do have some proposed change that we've also included in the LMPM enhancements that is, you know, somewhat related to that gives us some, you know, additional flexibility for changing the ex ante reasonableness assessment. So that's part of that. And then also, if you look at the Aliso Canyon filing, there was a request by NRG for us to use the Monday gas index that's published on Friday. You know, this by ICE, not always published, but when it is available, that we would use that as opposed to the current index that we're using, which is the Saturday index that's also published on Friday for the Monday day-ahead market. You know, if you look in our Aliso Canyon filing, when we saw that request from NRG, we agreed with that change. So we're currently looking at determining whether we would want to make a different, separate initiative on our quick filing based on, just to make that small change as well. But, you know, other than that, everything else I think is largely contained in CCW, in the CCW initiative that we'll be filing in April of next year.
So some of the stuff around just the gas constraint management and, you know, suspension of virtual bidding, some of those, do you expect you'll have to have tariff language filed for extending those again, or any idea on that management aspect?
You know, I think at this point we are, you know, our expectation is that the changes that I just discussed would, you know, largely supplant those temporary measures.
Okay, great, thank you.
This is Seth with DC Energy. About CR Track 2 in the assessment that you're going to do of the previous tracks, if you discover that certain elements of the proposal didn't have an effect or an intended desire on the CR market, are you going to consider repealing certain elements of Track 1B and Track 1A?
Did you say repealing?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I think I would put it, I wouldn't paint it in a corner like that. I guess we'll say we'll be looking at the overall, you know, efficiency of the CRR market, and if we're finding that there's inefficiencies that are being driven by the changes that have been put in place, we would address those, or if we feel like there's additional measures that need to be in place, we would address those, or if we feel like it's working well, then we may not do anything. So, you know, I think it's, you know, anything's on the table right now. We really need to see how the market works.
Okay, the question is sort of stems from whenever we talk about Track 2, it seems like we're always talking about it in the context of layering on more changes versus if we find out that something wasn't effective, we should also look at whether the existing changes had the intended consequences that we thought they were going to. That's just my point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I agree.
Thanks, operator. I'm not seeing any questions on my end unless you're seeing something.
Hi, this is Chunyu from PG&E again. So mainly I am quite concerned from implementation point of view. So looking at the 3 years policy roadmap, and look like you mentioned earlier that there are a lot of initiatives going to be implemented in 2019. So a quick question. So when you guys doing this policy work, do you actually also doing estimate as how much implementation work will be involved?
Yes, we do, and that's, if you look at the 3-year roadmap, when you look at, you accurately notice that there's a lot being implemented in the fall of 2019. We have the CCW initiative, which, I would call a large implementation effort. The intertide deviation settlement, we don't see as a huge implementation effort either, or the storage as a transmission asset. So, when taken all together, we think it's a feasible implementation plan, but at the same time, we wouldn't want to be doing, for example, the 15-minute scheduling for the Dayahead market enhancements at that same time. We think that would have overloaded it, even though the policy is largely completed for that. So that's why we pushed the Dayahead market 15-minute scheduling out for implementation in the fall of 2020. We also took into account that, as Don mentioned, that's going to have a large impact on the LSE settlement system, so we wanted to give, plenty of lead time for that initiative as well. So those are all the kind of things that we take into account as we, put this plan together. So when we're looking at, and then 2020, we do still have, a fairly large implementation schedule planned for that as well, with the Dayahead market enhancements, 15-minute scheduling, contingency modeling enhancements, and the tax changes, as well as all of the resource adequacy changes. So, again, we can't, you can have a bit of a domino effect here if we start pushing things off from 2019 to 2020 to 2021. So, we're trying to take all of that into account, balance out the workload as best we could, and again, put this together so that it makes, logical sense from a market evolution standpoint, as well as, capturing any types of implementation efficiencies that we can along the way. So those are all things that we take into account as we put the plan together.
And we do work with our technology division to ensure that these would be feasible as we plan this out. So we aren't just coming from a market design side.
Right. We get their input on this to understand what's feasible from an implementation standpoint.
And I just add, you can't just count the diamonds in every year.
Right.
For example, 2021, there's the extend Dayahead market to EIM entities diamond, which is, a big effort compared to some of these other diamonds you see in 2018 and 2019.
Right.
Especially.
Yeah.
Understand. Yeah, so you will capture the market efficiency. Also, if any feedback for implementation deficiency or unable to accomplish, you will get that as well. You will get the feedback as well.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Are there any more questions?
I'm not seeing anything on my end, operator, unless you're seeing something on your end.
At this time, there are no further questions.
Okay. Well, then I will discuss quickly what the remainder of our process schedule looks like. Stakeholder comments regarding the final roadmap are due on December 6th. We will be presenting our final roadmap to the EIM governing body on the 29th, which is Thursday, and that will be a briefing, as well as a briefing to our CAISO board on December 13th. After we brief both boards, we will then post the final roadmap, and we will then continue on with accepting any catalog submissions that are going to be reflected in the February catalog update. As a reminder, the February catalog update includes all of the initiatives that are shown on our annual plan, and we will be accepting additional submissions by January 8th, I believe it is. So if there are no further questions, then we will go ahead and conclude our web conference today.
Thanks, Brittany. As a reminder, look for the recording for the session to be available within the next couple of business days. Thanks for joining today's call.
Thank you for joining today's call. The call is now concluded, and you may disconnect.